definitely. Just wanted to say that it's nice to see Patrick, who is an ex-Bartlett student from the master's program. So it's really good to see ex-students from the Bartlett being engaged in this field. And I'm really looking forward to hear what he has to say.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Patrick Horne, and I'll be presenting my paper titled Assessing the Role of Virtual Reality as a Psychological Design Tool within Current Architectural Practice. I'm not sure how many of you attended yesterday's design cognition session, but I presented a different paper. I actually had to record it in the end because unfortunately I couldn't make the session, so I apologise for that. And for any of you that did attend, you'll see that both of the papers stem from the same body of research, so there is a bit of overlap in the beginning, but I think in this paper it diverts into a different path, which I myself probably find slightly more engaging. You can say that about your own research. So yeah. So my predominant research interest lies in bridging the divide between architecture and environmental psychology, specifically by using virtual reality as a platform. My research explores new methods of testing how we experience environments and exploring how as architects we can use this to inform our designs in a feasible way. I work as an architect and I see this research as a development of a practical tool for architectural practice. So phenomenology might be best described as our lived experience, and therefore as architects considering the phenomenological effects of our designs is a crucial design factor. I think all architects like to think they know how a space will feel, and if you remove all the other considerations when modelling a form or the way light comes into a building or the finishes, architects like to believe that they have an understanding of how this will affect us. And I think we generally see this as a human skill inherently learnt from years of experience, rather than a measurable or quantifiable thing. On the other hand, environmental psychology actually studies this. It studies how spaces make us feel. You could say it studies the phenomenology of space. And despite this, in most research institutions, environmental psychology is an entirely separate discipline from architecture, or at least I've found that in my experience. And for example, I apologise for repeating myself from yesterday again, but when I began this research a few years ago at the Bartlett, both of the heads of the thesis programme at the Bartlett, they didn't even know what environmental psychology was, which is quite outstanding. So why is that? Well, I think the problem with environmental psychology, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but because our experience of space is so complex, it's been impossible to identify usable patterns to feasibly integrate into architectural practice. For example, there was a study that found that painting the walls of a prison a very specific shade of pink lowered inmate violence, I think, but it took about 5 years to complete, and so it's too slow for us as architects to use. However, more recently in other scientific fields, such as cognitive neuroscience, there's been developments and they've been able to more accurately understand how our spatial cognition and perception works. And you could say that they've been able to peel back this notion of phenomenology and begin to measure the specific ways that spaces affect us. And I think as architects, this calls into question the way that we design, the way we make decisions about our designs. So I think virtual reality is a more powerful tool than most people realise. It's been proven that virtual environments, when seen through a headset, psychologically affect us in a very similar manner to real ones. And this is because our cognition of space is hugely dominated by visual stimuli. And when our brains begin to embrace virtual environments and we navigate around them, many of the same processes begin to occur. One option, of course, would be to put our clients into virtual reality and stick neurons into their brains and see how they respond to our designs, which I'm sure many of you know that this is exactly what Kate Jeffrey does with mice. I think she helped to organise this conference. However, this paper is proposing a more feasible solution for architectural practice and looks at how by exploiting the fidelity that virtual environments can provide, what information can simple psychological examinations tell us about our designs and how they affect their inhabitants. So this paper outlines 5 separate experiments that I conducted to explore how participants' psychological responses to virtual environments might first be collected and then utilised within an architectural design. And within the paper, I outline each of these experiments much more closely. For this presentation, I'm instead going to show you a short 5-minute video that I made to explain these tests a couple of years ago, which hopefully should be a bit more fun. Yeah.
In the 1970s, the field of environmental psychology was created to study how our built environment affects us. However, due to a lack of applicable findings, the discipline has become largely estranged from architectural practice. How Do You Feel explores how virtual environments provide a new feedback tool to test the experiential effects of our buildings in a progressive, useful way. This research examines this proposed form of public consultation through 5 experimental tests. Each method of consultation is applied within the design process of one of 5 buildings: an archive, gallery, market, city hall, and park. This film will outline how each test informed the design process, opening this research to a wider audience. For the archive, participants were asked questions referring to specific qualities of the environment. For each building, an adjective was targeted for the architecture to evoke. In the case of the archive, the public consultation sought to increase how inspiring the archive appeared to visitors. Therefore, participants' responses to the environment were analysed to inform a series of architectural revisions. For instance, when participants were asked which areas of the environment they felt were most pleasurable, multiple responses alluded to a central pathway illuminated by the roof structure. In response, this pathway was extended along the archive. For the gallery, a subterranean building, the aim of the public consultation was to increase how situated users felt within the gallery's context. Participants were asked to explore a testing ground of architectural interventions that connected the gallery with its context above. Within this environment, participants were asked to state any areas where they felt noticeably situated within the gallery's context. Analysis of this data was then used to inform a series of revisions to the design. For example, multiple participants highlighted a ceiling cavity that framed a view onto a billboard above. Transferring this to the gallery, targeted openings are formed to frame similar views. For the market, each participant was transformed into an architect. Participants were encouraged to build a market around themselves in virtual reality, with the instruction to make their designs as saturated as possible.
Slightly more to get to you do get this here.
Here, results were perhaps understandably mixed due to an unfamiliarity with the 3-dimensional user interface. However, analysing the data given, a series of architectural changes were proposed to make the market more saturated, including adding upper levels, disrupting its linear grid, and increasing diversity in its height. For the City Hall, participants were instructed to walk from one side of an exterior debating chamber to the other. The chamber was designed to be as free as possible, in that it avoided conditioning participants' movements. Therefore, areas where participants commonly grouped were analysed to revert their apparent attraction. This led to a series of revisions to the chamber's layout, including evenly spreading the debates and adding pebble-like stands to divert movement through the site. For the park, participants were asked to explore 5 different environments, each testing a different architectural strategy to induce tranquility, such as blocking the surrounding city or rising up to create a dramatic contrast with it. In each environment, participants were simply asked, how does this environment make you feel?
Happy, welcome. Lovely. Feels a lot more overwhelmed. Calm.
These responses were then interpreted to inform a series of 5 new experimental parks from the elements deemed successful. For example, similar uses of mirrors, vantage points, height, and water were carried forwards for further exploration. Each method of consultation collected unique data regarding spatial inhabitation, and this research stands to inform future applications of this design process. Ultimately, each test brought participants closer to the realities of these unbuilt architectures, and the design of each building was informed in a logical, progressive way. How Do You Feel stands to prove that using current technologies, a new qualitative facet of architectural design can be explored.
Yep, so I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry for the slightly overdramatic music for the conference, but yeah. I want to emphasize that the tests, they don't represent 5 distinct or prevailing approaches to this research. They instead just outline what I saw as 5 obvious starting points. You'll notice that the majority of the tests ask participants how they feel within each environment, and I think that highlights the true kind of value in this potential method. The best way to find out how someone feels, is simply to ask them, and this is what architects can be doing with their designs in current architectural practice. Considering this as a process of public consultation, I think the potential to actually influence architectural design is clearly much higher than traditional public consultation processes. And looking at these tests, you might also hypothesize that the level of engagement within this consultation process actually betters the results that are produced. For example, in methodology 1 and methodology 5, participants were encouraged to assess the environments in a very detailed way, and their responses provide probably the richest data set for interpretation. And in the case of methodology 4, where participants were encouraged to build environments around them, these were the results, which were the least immediate value potentially, but it's very hard to overlook how active everyone became within that test and how active participants could become within a design process. And I believe that the value of participants' engagement within the testing process using new digital technology shouldn't be undermined. And I think the tests also show a platform in which architectural intuition and data can work together. I know and understand that some of the data collected could be subject to further scientific scrutiny, for example, transcript analysis of some of the results. However, for me, it's the data with the clearest spatial implications that are the most interesting. And the tests also show that it's potentially the architect who's best suited to actually undertake these examinations and interpret the results in it. And I'm aware the process is quasi-scientific at best, but if we're to feasibly implement such research into architectural studios and begin to bridge the divide between architecture and environmental psychology, then perhaps this is okay. The data collected within these tests informs the design process through probable interpretation as opposed to proving specific stimuli and effects. But I feel that this empowers architects to use data rather than instructing them on how to use it. So to conclude, the tests don't certify any specific testing process. I don't think there's any of these that I'm specifically advocating for. but I believe they demonstrate that there's value in this approach. And I believe that by accepting a trade-off between scientific validation and feasible application within practice, we could begin to implement psychological research immediately. And doing so is surely the first step to creating an informed, evidence-based design process within architectural practice. So I've put some key references on the screen here. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. You'll see my email address below, so please get in touch if you want to address anything further.